13, Mr Speaker, please.
As much as £250 billion could be added to the UK economy if women started and scaled businesses at the same rate as men. I'm determined that trade should play its part in opening up greater opportunities for women, both in the UK and across the world.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for her first answer. Can my right honourable friend tell me what the UK will be doing to build on our close ties with Cambodia, Laos and Vietnam to expand trading opportunities, especially for women, particularly given Vietnam's membership of the CPTPP?
First of all, we've appointed a splendid trade envoy for those three countries who's going to do a brilliant job promoting opportunities for women and everyone through free trade agreements. And my honourable friend is absolutely right. CPTPP contains important provisions to open up trade for women, and of course Vietnam is a key part of that agreement.
Mr Speaker, police up and down the country and number 14.
Minister Atkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government is clear that it is unacceptable that women seeking or staff providing healthcare advice should feel intimidated or harassed. The Home Office has been keeping this important matter under review. We are now considering again whether more should be done to protect those accessing or providing abortion services, and have reached out to service providers and the police to understand their experiences of these protests, but the impact on women is of course at the centre of our considerations.
Dr. Ruperhout.
Speaker, it's a very encouraging reply from the Minister, because right now, up and down the country, women are being intimidated and police are having their time taken up with 40 Days for Life, an anti-choice group running a 40-day protest outside clinics in Spain, in France, in Australia, in Canada. They have legislation to do this. I'm encouraged by what she says. Can I ask her to please follow suit and take heed of the bill that we had in June? Overwhelming support for this House to do the same here.
I have the pleasure of meeting the Honourable Lady and indeed my Honourable friend for Harwich and North Essex later today to discuss this topic. She will know the meticulous approach that we have applied to this very important issue. There is a balance to be struck with the right to express and to have freedom of speech, but clearly the impact on women and staff working in these centres is really important, and I'm very pleased that PSPOs are working in her area and two other areas. Manchester, I understand, has just received an order or implementing an order as well, and we have to very much balance those matters in mind, but I look forward to continuing this discussion in only a few hours' time.
Topicals Fleetramond.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, alongside sex, race and sexual orientation, geography and social economic status can affect opportunity. I want to widen the focus of our understanding of equality to include outcomes for white working class children, so we can ensure we're levelling up our country. I've therefore asked the Equality Hub to consider the importance of geography and background alongside factors such as sex, ethnicity and disability. This will make sure we truly level up Britain.
Drummond.
Mr Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree with me that the Equalities and Human Rights Commission should be focused on its responsibility to enforce equality and human rights law?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I'm delighted that we've been able to put forward Baroness Kishwar Faulkner as our preferred candidate to chair the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and I know that she is committed to making sure the focus of the Commission is on enforcing our important equality laws.
We're heading over to the Shadow Minister, Marcia de Cover.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Equality Act sets out that the government must seek to advance equality of opportunity in relation to its functions. Yet throughout this pandemic, ministers have repeatedly failed to do so. It is vital that the government takes proactive steps to prevent the disproportionate impact of COVID on disabled, Black, Asian and ethnic minority people. Failure to do so is neglect, it is discriminatory and it is unlawful. So what evidence does the minister have that her government is fulfilling its public sector equality duty as set out in the Equality Act?
Mr. Speaker, it is completely false to say that the government has not acted and deliberately ignores the significant measures we have put in place to reduce the spread of the virus in all communities across the United Kingdom, which we have repeatedly stated in this House. As I mentioned earlier, I will be making a full oral statement tomorrow, but it is known that we have taken many key measures to ensure that NHS frontline staff in particular from ethnic minority backgrounds are best protected and to ensure we fully understand the links between the virus and ethnicity.
Marshall de Courvoa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2,500 deaths could have been avoided during the first wave of the pandemic had people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities been adequately protected. Last month, I wrote to the Minister asking what steps her government had taken to address the disproportionate impact on COVID, but I have yet to receive a reply, and we are now in a second wave. The Minister says she will be giving a statement tomorrow, but I asked the Minister, as it is oral questions today, she still hasn't given an update on the progress of implementing the recommendations from Public Health England's report. It has been over 4 months, so can she give us an update on those 7 recommendations and when they will be fully implemented?
The Shadow Minister has written many letters to me over the last 4 months, and I have replied them. It is simply untrue to say that she has not received a reply. She knows that the work that we're doing is what has been taking the recommendations in progress throughout government. The oral statement will give ample time tomorrow for me to fully address and explain all the work that government has been doing and what the evidence has shown us. And I would encourage her to attend the oral statement tomorrow because there's very much that she could learn on this topic.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister tell us what assessment has been made and what steps are being taken to look at the impact that the increasing numbers of COVID-19 cases and the pandemic is having on the LGBTQ+ community in this country?
We have been looking at the disproportionate impact that the virus has had on very many groups. That is not a group that we have seen a disproportionate impact in terms of the effects of the virus. What has impacted that community is their inability to access healthcare services like the rest of the population. And that is something which we hope is going to be addressed in terms of how we are managing local lockdowns and being able to keep pressure off the NHS.
Heading to North Devon with Selene Saxby. Selene Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend detail what steps her department is taking to ensure that girls are able to access period products during the pandemic, especially when only 41% of schools are taking advantage of the government's offer of free period products? And in this Environmental Week, does my right honourable friend also agree with me that wherever possible, these products should be free of plastic?
The government is taking a range of action to ensure that everyone is able to access affordable period products. We are providing fully funded access to free period products in schools and colleges across England. The scheme remained in operation during partial school closures, and we expect uptake of it to significantly increase as schools have fully opened. The scheme provides a wide range of products, including environmentally friendly tampons and pads, alongside reusable products such as menstrual cups and reusable pads.
That's the end of the questions. We're now moving on to questions to the Prime Minister. We start with questions to the Prime Minister with Catherine West. Catherine West.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know the thoughts of the whole House will be with the honourable member for Bolton South East. I'm sure members from across the House will want to join me in wishing her a speedy recovery. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Catherine West.
Mr. Speaker, could I associate myself with those kind remarks on behalf of my honourable friend from Bolton? And my constituents are reeling from the 9% contraction of the economy since March of this year. Unemployment has skyrocketed and joblessness in Haringey is the highest in the capital. Unfortunately, we are at the same time facing the idea that there could be a congestion tax forced onto 4 million extra Londoners by this government. These Londoners already facing the double whammy of COVID and the double whammy of financial ruin. Will the Prime Minister please immediately stop the imposition of this dreadful plan? I look forward to his answer.
Mr. Speaker, I must respectfully inform the Honourable Lady that the current Mayor of London had effectively bankrupted TfL before coronavirus had even hit and left a massive black hole in its finances, and any need to make up that deficit is entirely down to him. It is entirely his responsibility. Any expansion of the congestion charge or any other measure taken to improve the finances of TfL are entirely the responsibility of the bankrupt current Labour Mayor of London.
Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, people of the length and breadth of the country have made many sacrifices over the last few months to try to suppress COVID-19. But infection rates are increasing fast and Buckinghamshire may soon find itself in Tier 2. Can my right honourable friend tell the people of my Aylesbury constituency how long we'd be expected to stay there, what additional help there'd be for local businesses, and crucially, what the route out would be?
Thank you. Well, I hope reassure my honourable friend by telling him that the incidence in the Vale of Aylesbury is in fact less than half the England average, and the way forward for the constituents in the Vale of Aylesbury and everywhere else is for everyone to keep following the guidance, observing the new restrictions, but obviously washing hands, wearing a face covering in enclosed spaces and keeping a sensible distance, Mr. Speaker.
We come to the Leader of the Opposition, Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his remarks about the Honourable Member for Bolton South East. Prime Minister, how does an area which goes into Tier 3 restrictions get out of those restrictions?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the simplest and most effective way for areas to get out of those restrictions is, of course, to get the R down to 1 or below, and I'm very pleased to say that some areas are already having a considerable effect with the measures that they're taking.
Yes, Tom.
Mr. Speaker, can I press the Prime Minister on that answer? If the infection rate R in a Tier 3 area has not come below 1, will it be possible in any circumstances for that area to come out of Tier 3 if the R hasn't come below 1?
Mr. Speaker, obviously the R is one of the measures that we look at, and we'll take a decision based on a number of things, including the R, but also, of course, rates of infection, rates of admission to hospital, and other data. But the most important thing is for areas that do go into Tier 3, and I'm very grateful to local leadership in the areas that have gone into Tier 3, because it's the right thing for them to do, the right thing for their constituents, the right thing to save lives. When they are able to make progress, and of course they will come out of Tier 3. And as he knows full well, the measures that are put in place are reviewed every 28 days.
Stop.
Mr. Speaker, I'm now confused by the Prime Minister's answer. If it's not the R rate under 1, what is it? Because millions of people want to know the answer to that question, because millions of them are in Tier 3 and millions more are likely to go into Tier 3. They really need to know. And Prime Minister, on Friday, the Chief Scientific Officer said Tier 3 on its own certainly isn't enough to get the R rate below 1. On the same day, the Prime Minister himself said there was only a chance of getting infection rates down. This goes to the heart of the issue in Greater Manchester and elsewhere, because the widespread fear, Prime Minister, is that Tier 3 is the worst of all worlds. It brings significant economic harm without getting the virus sufficiently under control to exit Tier 3. So instead of being a solution, Tier 3 is a gateway to weeks and weeks, more likely months and months of agony, from which there's no likely exit. Can the Prime Minister not see the problem if there isn't a clear exit?
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I've made it absolutely clear that part of the country going into Tier 3 is only in there for 28 days. We will review it after 28 days, and areas that have gone into Tier 3, I believe, are already making progress, and areas where there are restrictions in place are also showing signs of progress. We are pursuing, Mr. Speaker, a local, a regional approach, which is the sensible approach for this country. That's what the epidemiology supports. It's what the Deputy Chief Medical Officer supported last night. And again, I want to thank a local leadership in Merseyside, in Lancashire, actually in London and West Midlands and elsewhere for what they are doing. And I may say that it is a bit incoherent of the right honourable gentleman opposite to attack local lockdowns when he wants to plunge the whole country, back into a damaging lockdown for weeks on end, and he has no clue about how he would propose to get the country out of that, does he?
Yes, Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate there's going to be a review every 28 days, but if the R rate hasn't come below 1, then the infection rate is still going up, and the numbers are going up, and the admissions are going up, and the numbers in hospital are going up, and the deaths are going up. Is the Prime Minister seriously saying that he would take a Tier 3 area out of Tier 3 with the R above 1? I don't think so. Let me spell out what this means. On Friday, thousands of people in Greater Manchester, taxi drivers, pub and hospitality workers, people working in betting shops, the self-employed and freelancers, will either be out of work or face significant pay cuts. That's the reality on Friday in Greater Manchester. But their rent and their mortgage won't be lower, their food and their heating bills won't be lower, and that could last for months. Why can't the Prime Minister and the Chancellor understand this? Stop bargaining with people's lives, stop dividing communities, and provide the support that's needed in Manchester.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud that this government has already given Greater Manchester £1.1 billion in support for business, £200 million in extra unring-fenced funding, £50 million to tackle infections in care homes, £20 million for tests and trace, another £22 million for local response that we announced yesterday. And yesterday, the Mayor of Greater Manchester was offered a further £60 million, which he turned down, Mr. Speaker, with no encouragement, I may say, to support from the right honourable gentleman. So I can tell the House today, Mr. Speaker, is that that cash will be distributed to the boroughs of Greater Manchester. And I want to thank my honourable and right honourable colleagues across the House for Haywood and Middleton, from Bolton North West, from Bolton North East, from Bury South, Bury North, Cheadle, Lee, Altrincham and Sale West, and Hazel Grove for the support that they have given in this matter, Mr. Speaker.
This is a Prime Minister that can pay £7,000 a day for consultants on track and trace, which isn't working, that can find £43 million for a garden bridge that was never built, but he can't find £5 million for the people of Greater Manchester. I really think the Prime Minister's crossed a Rubicon here, not just with the miserly way that he's treated Greater Manchester, but the grub it, take it or leave it way these local deals are being done. It's corrosive to public trust, to pit region against region, mayor against mayor, council against council, asking them to trade away their businesses and jobs. We need a one-nation approach. Replace these endless local battles with clear national criteria and proper support for jobs. Labour's motion this afternoon would do that. Why won't the Prime Minister support it?
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the support that we've given, the one nation Conservative support that we've given to the entire country. £200 billion in support for jobs and livelihoods across the whole of the country already. A further £9.9 billion now for the Job Support Scheme. It is this government that has cut VAT for business, deferred business rates. There is no other country in Europe, Mr. Speaker, where so much support, so much help has been given to the population to get through this crisis, and we will continue to do that. But I think it is the height of absurdity, Mr. Speaker, that he stands up and attacks the economic consequences of the measures that we're obliged to take across some parts of the country when he wants to turn the lights out with a full national lockdown, taking kids... that was his policy last week anyway, wasn't it? Perhaps he could confirm that's still his policy. Is that what he wants to do?
Here's Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, at his press conference yesterday, the Prime Minister produced heat maps across the country showing the infection rate up in all ages across all regions, and particularly showing regions that have been in the equivalent of Tier 2 restrictions for weeks, if not months, moving into Tier 3. Now, if they're moving into Tier 3, Tier 2 hasn't worked, because if Tier 2 worked, they should be going to Tier 1. So Tier 2 goes to Tier 3, Tier 3 has no end because there's no prospect or confidence in the R rate coming below 1. And I do not believe that a Tier 3 region will come out of those restrictions unless R is below 1 and whilst numbers are still going up. So we now have a stark choice. And by the way, Prime Minister, Cornwall is the only place, possibly with the Isle of Wight, where the infection rate today is less than Greater Manchester when it went into local restrictions. So this idea that some areas are immune is wrong. So there's a stark choice. Carry on with the Prime Minister's approach, which will lead to weeks and weeks and months of prolonged agony in all your constituencies for millions of people in Tier 2 and 3 with no exit, or put in place a 2 to 3 week time-limited circuit break to break the cycle and bring the virus back under control. Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland in part have chosen that path. With half-term starting this Friday, this may be the last opportunity for the Prime Minister to put in place an effective circuit break. The Prime Minister was too slow in the first phase of this pandemic. He's being too slow again. We cannot repeat this mistake. Will he act in the public interest and take the opportunity to put in place a circuit break this Friday?
Mr. Speaker, we will do whatever it takes to get this country through the crisis, with or without the support of the right honourable gentleman opposite. And I may say that I think that his policy, I've explained why I don't believe that his policy is the right one for the country, because it would involve closing schools, it would involve shuttering businesses, with all the psychological, the emotional damage that lockdown of that kind brings. He can't say how many circuit breakers he thinks would be necessary. He can't say how long they would go on. He can't say how much damage they would do to the UK economy and to people's mental health, Mr. Speaker. We, on the other hand, want to go on with our commonsensical approach, which is a local and a regional approach, keeping kids in school, keeping our economy moving, because that is the way to get the whole of our country through this crisis together, so that we all, and particularly those regions that are now, alas, under Tier 3 restrictions, all the regions of the country bounce back strongly together, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah. Let's head up to Cheshire with Edward Timpson. Edward Timpson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. After recent positive progress, COVID has disproportionately and adversely affected participation levels in female sport and physical activity. So to help reverse this, will my right honourable friend lend his support to the development of the first ever Women's and Girls Football National Centre of Excellence in Winsford, in my constituency, a £70 million project that he has previously expressed enthusiasm for, and help build female grassroots sport back better?
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and this is a very exciting project. I welcome Cheshire FA's commitment to providing a new world-class facility for women and girls football, and I look forward to the proposed opening of the centre in Winsford.
We're now heading to the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford. Audio only. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my thoughts are very much with the member for Bolton South East. I hope she makes a speedy recovery. Mr. Speaker, next week, just as the pandemic is worsening, the Tory government will scrap the furlough scheme in a move that will cause a wave of mass redundancies across the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the Prime Minister is complaining that he can't get by on his £150,000 salary. So can I ask the Prime Minister, if he's finding life such a struggle, how on earth does he expect many workers to get by on just £5.84 an hour when the Tory cuts to furlough sink in?
Mr. Speaker, actually, I'm proud of what we've done to support people on low incomes throughout this period, and indeed before. It was this government that raised the living wage by record amounts. We've just increased universal credit by about £1,000 a year, and he makes the point about furlough, Mr. Speaker, and as he knows, combine the universal credit with job support, the job support scheme that we've just announced, and workers will be getting 80% of their existing salary. We will get this country through this crisis, and we will continue to support people of low incomes throughout the period.
Turning to Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid the Prime Minister just simply doesn't get it. Yesterday, we saw his total disregard for the people of Greater Manchester, a Tory attitude that people in Scotland are all too familiar with. Millions of families are struggling to get by, and this Tory government wants to cut their incomes in the middle of a pandemic. It is clear that the Prime Minister has made a deliberate decision to let unemployment soar, just like Thatcher did in the 1980s. Time is running out. With 1 week left, will the Prime Minister finally U-turn on his cuts to the furlough scheme and invest in our communities, or will he leave millions of people on the scrap heap?
Mr. Speaker, I really must reject what the right honourable gentleman has just said, because it bears no relation to the facts or the reality of what this government is doing to support people across the country. And it's not just the £200 billion investment in jobs and livelihoods. What we also are engaged in, and what we will continue to deliver, is a colossal investment in education, in health, in housing, in infrastructure, that will deliver jobs and growth throughout this United Kingdom for a generation, Mr. Speaker.
Andrew Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I congratulate the Prime Minister and negotiating team for their strong stance in negotiations with the EU, and ask the Prime Minister whether he agrees with me that the EU's position on fishing and ECJ demonstrate they are not treated as an independent state, they are not acting in good faith to deliver a free trade agreement, and in international law, the UK is therefore entitled to leave the withdrawal agreement and make its own arrangements regarding the UK's own internal market.
Well, Mr. Speaker, whatever the effect of the withdrawal agreement, I can certainly assure her that the UK's internal market, which I think everybody on both sides of the House values, is protected and upheld by the UK Internal Market Bill, which is going through another place at the moment, and also, of course, protecting the Good Friday Agreement.
Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, Mikey is severely disabled. He turned 18 last month, so he's one of the first to see his child trust fund mature. But Mikey's disabilities mean he can't manage his own finances, so he can't access these savings. Government rules on child trust fund mean his parents can't either, without paying expensive legal fees. This is Mikey's own money. He wants to use it to buy a specially adapted tricycle. So will the Prime Minister look at proposals that Mikey's father has shown me to end this injustice for disabled young people and let Mikey buy this trike?
Of course, Mr. Speaker, I will do whatever I can to help in the particular case that he raises. I don't know whether the tricycle he mentions is eligible for a number of the schemes that I can immediately call to mind. But if he cares to write to me, I will of course answer immediately.
Heading up to Harrow for Bob Blackman to land this question. Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Ground Control. My right honourable friend will be well aware of the negotiations going on between the Department for Transport and the current Mayor of London on a further bailout for Transport for London. The current Mayor is demanding an eye-watering £5.65 billion to keep TfL running for the next 18 months, yet he refuses to accept any economies because of offending his union paymasters. Can my right honourable friend confirm, however, that the government has not required the current Mayor of London to expand the congestion charge to the North and South Circular Roads?
Mr. Speaker, well, I can certainly confirm, as I said in my answer to the first question, is that the black hole in TfL's finances, the bankruptcy of TfL, which was left, by the way, in robust financial health by the previous mayor, Mr. Speaker, it certainly was, is entirely the fault of the current Labour Mayor of London, with his grossly irresponsible demagogic fare policies, which were never pursued by the previous Mayor of London, I may say, Mr. Speaker, and the fault lies entirely, therefore, with him, and I trust my honourable friend will make that clear.
Dr. Rupaha.
Mr. Speaker, financial support packages, tackling homelessness, rail nationalisation, honouring Marcus Rashford. There's plenty this government's done on COVID that I applaud. But with winter set to bite and no end to the virus in sight. Can I ask the PM to reconsider the arbitrary end to many of his schemes set months ago when we knew so little? 3 million self-employed were completely out of all of these. A number of them set to face destitution when the minimum income floor ends next month. And 3,272 kids in his own seat, 2016 in mind, school dinners are in the balance. Can he start by voting with us tonight and make sure that that gong doesn't just mean nothing?
Sorry, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, can you just sit down? Please, we've got to have short questions. I want to get through the list. We've got to help each other. Prime Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Honourable Lady is quite right to call attention to the difficulties facing many families right now because of the crisis that we've been in. But the most important thing, and I think this is, I hope, common ground, actually, is to keep kids in school if we possibly can. That would be vitiated by the series of lockdowns that are being proposed. I don't want to go down that route. And what I want to do is to make sure that we continue to support families throughout the crisis so that they have the cash available to feed their kids as they need to do.
On to your question, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted that Kettering General Hospital is part of the biggest hospital building programme in a generation. I can tell my honourable friend the Infrastructure Delivery Task Force is already involved in delivering the health infrastructure programme, which includes Kettering General Hospital.
Thank the Prime Minister for visiting the night shift at Kettering General Hospital in February and seeing for himself at first hand the wonderful work being done by local medics and staff. The hospital can expedite at speed ambitious plans for its rebuild, but only if the time taken for regulatory clearances at NHS improvement are dramatically shortened. Will the Prime Minister cut NHS red tape so local people can have the improvements we need at our local hospital as quickly as possible?
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I hope I can reassure him by saying that clinical modelling work is now complete and the site development is now underway, Mr. Speaker, as we speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 16th of June, the Prime Minister agreed to provide free school meal vouchers to hungry children over the summer holidays, after claiming that just 24 hours beforehand, he was completely unaware of the campaign that was calling for it. Last week, Liberal Democrat Education Minister for Wales, Kirsty Williams, guaranteed that free school meal provision during school holidays would continue until at least Easter 2021, and yesterday the Scottish Government committed to do the same. So, Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister confirm that he is indeed aware of these announcements, and if so, when does he plan to do the right thing?
Well, Mr. Speaker, governments of all stripes have supplied free school meals since 1906, and I'm proud that it was this Conservative government that extended universal free school meals to 5-, 6- and 7-year-olds. The party opposite were in power for 30 of the last 100 years and never did anything like that, Mr. Speaker. We support kids of low incomes in school, and we will continue to do so. But the most important thing is to keep them in school and not to go to tear off into another national lockdown, taking them out of school. And we will continue, Mr. Speaker, to use the benefit system and all the systems of income support to support young people, to support children throughout the holidays as well.
To the southwest with Sigurry Street. Sigurry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One lesson we've all learnt in the past 9 months is that the internet is even more important to our lives than we imagined. So will my right honourable friend confirm today that despite COVID and all the other challenges he's grappling with, that we will deliver on our manifesto commitment to roll out full fibre superfast broadband across the United Kingdom and ensure that we are global leaders in digital connectivity? Thank you.
Yes, indeed. I thank my right honourable friend, for everything he does to lobby for that, and I can tell him that our local delivery partner in Devon and Somerset has provided connectivity of the kind he describes to 300,000 premises over the last across those two counties, and indeed we are going to be a world leader in connectivity, Mr. Speaker, as we build back better.
To South London with Janet Davey. Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister confirm that his government is seeking to force the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, to remove free travel for under 18s and for holders of the 60+ travel card in return for further financial support for TfL to keep the tubes and buses running? How can this be right when many people in London, and indeed in my constituency, already have months of genuine hardship ahead of them?
Mr. Speaker, it was the Labour Mayor of London who bankrupted TfL's finances, and any changes that he brings in are entirely his responsibility. And I suggest she holds him to account.
Gideon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the Prime Minister is committed to doubling down on levelling up. Will he join me for a virtual tour of Stoke-on-Trent Central and a round table with key partners focused on delivering for the left behind? Not least to ensure that the Transforming Cities Fund investment will revolutionise public transport in the city.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's an easy commitment for me to make, and I'm delighted to do so. And I can tell her that we're investing nearly £20 million through our city deal in pioneering a new programme of sustainable, low-carbon and low-cost heat energy to Stoke-on-Trent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 weeks ago, the Prime Minister stood at that dispatch box praising Luton as the only place to have come out of local restrictions. But praise doesn't pay the bills. Luton's proud industries of manufacturing, aviation and events can't get by on sound bites and figures that bear no relation to what's really happening to jobs and businesses. He knows entire industries are at stake. So is it his inaction, indifference or incompetence? Will he support businesses that need it and areas that need it throughout this crisis?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the people of Luton for their hard and indeed their heroic work, as I thank people across the country for what they are doing. And I want to support businesses in Luton, and that's why we want to continue with the sensible, balanced, regional, local approach that we are. And I hope she agrees with me that it would make no sense at all for businesses, hard-pressed businesses in Luton, if they had their lights turned off and their doors shuttered in a series of multiple lockdowns of a kind that are recommended by the party opposite.
Miller. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Aberconwy and North Wales are learning to live with COVID-19, but we're frustrated by national Welsh Government policy that seeks to place restrictions on us that are the same in the village of Cwm Penmachno as they are in the capital, Cardiff. Last week, my right honourable friend agreed that a shared responsibility is the way to tackle this pandemic. Does he see that the future of this is a series of rolling national lockdowns, or can businesses and residents hope that they will be given more trust to look after their own health and those they care for?
Well, I think my honourable friend really puts the distinction very, very clearly and sharply, and it's the commonsensical, balanced approach that we're following. I do think that where local leaders step up to the plate, and I was delighted that South Yorkshire came on board this morning, had a great conversation with Dan Jarvis last night. Where local leadership is shown, we can really make huge progress in getting the R down, and that's the right approach for the country.
Heading up to Knowsley with Sir George Howard. Sir George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I return to the subject of free school meals? There are 7,108 children in Knowsley reliant on free school meals, which are vital in ensuring that they are properly fed. Whether to extend to Easter is both a moral and political choice. So will the Prime Minister make the right choice and agree to extend free school meals to Easter?
Mr. Speaker, of course we have free school meals throughout term time. That's entirely right. What we want to do is to make sure that we continue to support people on low incomes throughout the crisis, and that's also what we're going to do.
We're heading to Essex with Stephen Metcalfe. Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend will know, part of my constituency has now been placed into Tier 2 restrictions. Can he therefore reassure everyone that if they stick to the rules, observe the hands, face and space message, and self-isolate when required, accompanied by suitable enforcement for those who blatantly flout the law, we will come out of these restrictions all the sooner?
My honourable friend puts his finger on it, and that's exactly what we need to do. And I can tell him that just the areas that go into high levels of concern are reviewed every 14 days, and the restrictions, as I told the Right Honourable Gentleman, are reviewed every 28 days. The way to get through it is exactly as he says, to follow the guidance, particularly the hands, face, space basics.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Barnes in my constituency have been cut off from public transport routes for some months now by the closure of Hammersmith Bridge. Can the Prime Minister confirm reports that the government is now planning to charge Barnes residents £15 a day to own a car and charge them extra council tax to pay for facilities that they cannot use, despite the fact that TfL reserves were increasing before the virus hit?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that Hammersmith Bridge has been closed entirely thanks to the incompetence of the current Labour Mayor of London, and that Sean Bailey, the Conservative candidate, is going to reopen it, and that is the best thing. That is the best thing possible.
Let's head to Reigate with Crispin Blunt. Crispin Blunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend leads the country through Brexit and delivers global Britain, will he ensure that the first consideration he gives to the values and policies of his government are those that which will unite and bring our country together and make all those who voted Remain for what they thought were the internationalist values of the European Union proud again of their country for bringing those values to global Britain?
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're going to use the G7 presidency, the COP26 summit, to champion our values across the world, and in particular the one that he mentions, female education, which I think is the single policy that can really transform the outcomes across the planet. And our global objective is to help 40 million girls across the world to get a decent education.
Lillian Greenwood.
Mr. Speaker, his government lost control of the virus, making extra restrictions inevitable. But with no certainty, no communication and no new financial support, he's killing Nottingham businesses. Castle Rock Brewery is a Nottingham success story, but now it's on the verge of breakdown. 2 pubs closed permanently, jobs gone, and worried staff facing the prospect of being laid off with no pay. Countless other bars, restaurants and pubs tell the same story. Will he stop punishing successful Nottingham businesses for his failure and give them the help they desperately need?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I of course sympathise deeply with businesses that face difficulties because of the pandemic, though I would remind her that in her constituency the infection rate is now running at 815 per 100,000, and we must get that down. And I thank the people of Nottingham for what they're doing to get it down. And we will, of course, continue to provide the full panoply of support that we've offered and more throughout this crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the introduction of Tier 2 restrictions in York, can the Prime Minister be more open in communicating the evidence base for York going into Tier 2, outline a roadmap for the city's return to Tier 1 and urgently consider creation of specific support for York's hospitality industry suffering losses from the limbo that Tier 2 is creating?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Well, I can tell my honourable friend that the infection rate in York, alas, is now running at 279 per 100,000, and we must get it down. But we can get it down. We can get it down through the package of measures that we. People are complying with the guidance, that it is having an effect. And you can see that it's having an effect, Mr. Speaker, because the R, if it weren't for the efforts and the energies of the British people, the R would be running at 3 or more. It's now between 1.2 and 1.5. It won't take much, Mr. Speaker, it won't take much, the compliance in those areas that are hit at the moment, to get that R back down below 1. That's what we're aiming for, and that is the way to get businesses across the country, in the Right Honourable Lady's constituency in Nottingham, in his constituency, back on their feet as fast as possible. It would not be sensible, in my view, to plunge them all back into a sustained series of national lockdowns, particularly in areas where the virus is low.
Question, Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor has decided that people who are unable to work because of coronavirus restrictions should be paid as little as 2/3 of the national minimum wage. At the same time, the government is paying £7,000 a day for consultants to work on the failed Serco Track and Trace programme. Can the Prime Minister tell this House how on earth he thinks that is justifiable? And is this what he means by levelling up?
Mr. Speaker, the NHS Track and Trace is now testing more people than any other country in Europe. It's tested, I think, 26 million people so far, or conducted 26 million tests, and I'm also proud on her other point that we've been able to support people across the country in the way that we have. And she is not correct in what she says about the combined impact of the job support scheme and universal credit, because that lifts, they work in tandem, and that lifts people's incomes to 80%, in some cases to more than 90% of their current incomes. And that is the support that we're giving at the moment. But the best thing, Mr. Speaker, is to get our country through this crisis without going back into the social, the psychological and the emotional and the economic disaster. And disaster was the word that the party opposite used only a week or so ago, the disaster of a series of national lockdowns.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order.
Okay, Sarah, are you ready? We'll be all right for a minute. We're going to start. Okay. Order. Exceptionally, I've agreed to the Minister of State for Health and Social Care making a statement with a shorter notice period. So if members understand it was better to have it than not have it, so please accept my apologies for the late arrival of being able to put in. So I now call the Minister of State, Ed Argar, to read the statement. Ed Argar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'd like to make a statement on coronavirus, further to the statement my right honourable friend made last night. This virus remains a serious threat. Over 1 million people have tested positive for coronavirus in Europe over the past week. Here in the UK, yesterday, we recorded 21,331 positive cases, one of the highest recorded daily figures. Average daily hospital admissions in the UK have doubled in the past 14 days. And yesterday, we recorded the highest number of daily deaths, 241 since early June. So we must keep working hard together to keep this virus under control. We have been vigilant in monitoring the data and putting in place targeted local measures so we can bear down hard on the virus wherever we see it emerging. We have seen how local action can help flatten the curve, for example in Leicester and Bolton. This targeted local approach, supported by our local COVID alert level system, means we can have different rules in places like Cornwall where transmission is low to places where transmission is high and rising. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to specifically update the House on the discussions we have been having with local leaders in South Yorkshire. The situation in South Yorkshire remains serious. There have been more cases in South Yorkshire so far in October, over 12,000, than in July, August and September combined. The number of patients with COVID-19 in intensive care beds has reached over half the number seen at the height of the pandemic earlier this year. And the latest data suggests that numbers of patients on mechanical ventilation will soon be comparable to the first peak in March. So we need to act now to prevent the epidemic in South Yorkshire continuing to grow. I am pleased to inform the House that following discussions this week, the Government has reached an agreement with South Yorkshire on a package of measures to drive down transmission. That means that South Yorkshire, so the City of Sheffield, Barnsley, Rotherham and Doncaster, will be moving to the local COVID alert level very high, taking effect at 1 minute past midnight on Saturday morning. This includes the baseline measures for the very high alert level, which were agreed by the House earlier this month. And as well as this, and as agreed with local leaders, unfortunately casinos, betting shops, adult gaming centres and soft play centres will also have to close. And while gyms will remain open, classes will not be allowed. And on this point, Mr. Speaker, the Liverpool City region and my right honourable friend, the member for Southport, have also requested to bring their region into line with these measures. So gyms will be open and soft play centres will close in the Liverpool City region. Mr. Speaker, we know that some of the measures I've announced today are challenging and will have a real impact on people and businesses in South Yorkshire. So we will be putting in place substantial support. This includes the Job Support Scheme, which ensures those affected by business closures are still paid. Once topped up with universal credit, those on low incomes will receive at least 80% of their normal income. This agreement also includes additional funding of £11.2 million for the local area for local enforcement and contract tracing activity. As well as this, we are putting in place extra funding so the local authorities in South Yorkshire can continue to support businesses through this period. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank from the dispatch box all the local leaders in South Yorkshire for the collegiate and constructive way in which they have approached these negotiations. And I would like to thank all honourable members representing constituencies in this region as well. We have worked across party lines to reach an agreement that will protect public health and the NHS in South Yorkshire, while also supporting those who need it most. Mr. Speaker, I know that these local measures will be hard and entail further sacrifice. but through bearing down hard on the virus wherever and whenever we see it emerge, we can help to slow the spread of this virus and protect our loved ones and our local communities. This agreement will help us protect lives and livelihoods in South Yorkshire, and Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Shadow Secretary of State for Health, Jonathan Ashworth.
Well, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister of State for advance sight of his statement. So today we have another great swathe of the North put into lockdown. Now, Sheffield went into two-tier restrictions last Wednesday. So did ministers make the wrong judgment a week ago, or has new evidence come to light that was not apparent last Wednesday? And how many other areas in Tier 2 today are facing the same fate as Sheffield, such as those areas in Tier 2 that neighbour South Yorkshire, such as North East Derbyshire or Nottinghamshire? Now, the Secretary of State couldn't answer yesterday how long Greater Manchester will be in lockdown for, or what the criteria will actually be for leaving lockdown. So can the Minister of State today tell us how long South Yorkshire will be in lockdown? Does the nationwide R number need to fall below 1, as the Prime Minister suggested last week, or just the regional R number? Or, if in an area like Doncaster, and I see the Deputy Speaker in the chamber, in an area like Doncaster, if they get the R below 1, will they be able to leave lockdown? The Prime Minister at the dispatch box earlier talked about hospital admissions, so could he tell us what level do hospital admissions need to come down to for an area to exit lockdown? Now, I said yesterday, Mr. Speaker, my dad worked in casinos in Salford, my mum worked in bars. I know people will want to do the right thing and will understand that further measures are necessary to contain the spread of the virus. But families shouldn't face financial ruin. Now, he wants congratulations for the package he's allocated to South Yorkshire, but why is contact tracing funding subject to these negotiations and deals? I mean, the virus is out of control because of the failures of the £12 billion test and trace system. If local areas had been given these resources months ago to put in place effective contact tracing, we wouldn't be in this situation now. And those failures on contact tracing are impacting directly on people's lives. This afternoon, families across South Yorkshire who work in hospitality, whether in Doncaster or Sheffield or in places like Penistone or Rother Valley or Don Valley, will be asking why, if it was fair to pay 80% of wages in March, why they should now be expected to get by on just 2/3 of their wages in the run-up to Christmas. And this matters to families everywhere, Mr. Speaker, because we know further restrictions will be needed. Indeed, according to sources Briefing Times Radio, plans are being developed for a 3-week lockdown more widely next month. Perhaps he could confirm that his officials are now working on plans for a 3-week national lockdown next month. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Community Secretary said this morning there was now a national formula for areas under local lockdown. But ministers say they want a targeted local approach because circumstances vary. Yet when an area says our circumstances are different, like Greater Manchester, who've had restrictions since July, the Prime Minister says, tough, hard luck, you can't be treated any differently, and vindictively refuses Greater Manchester just £5 million extra to get a deal over the line. This is playing politics with people's jobs and with people's livelihoods. And we cannot defeat this virus on the cheap, and nor should it be broken on the backs of the lowest paid. Public health restrictions must go hand in hand with economic support, because as night follows day, falls in employment levels lead to rises in chronic illness. The Chancellor must pay out to help out and deliver a fair deal to support jobs and livelihoods under lockdown.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, my constituency neighbour up in Leicestershire. I have to say, he was, as usual, typically reasonable and measured, almost until the last moment, when I'm afraid the only person playing politics was him. To address his points, we are taking these steps now because we are taking them at the right time as the infection rate has continued to go up. In respect of other Tier 2 areas or neighbouring Tier 2 areas, it is only at this point this announcement that we are planning to make. This is the only move that has been announced and that is currently being considered. He asked about criteria, essentially. A number of his questions were how long for, how will it be judged. which are fair questions. Areas in Tier 3 or in Tier 2 will remain in those areas as long as is necessary to protect the health and of the local people and the NHS in that region. So he asked about the sort of things that will be relevant to when an area both enters it and comes out of it. Infection rates per 100,000, the impact on the NHS in terms of hospital capacity and how full they are on hospitalisation rates, as well as, of course, of relying and listening to local knowledge from local public health officials, which he would expect us to do. He touched on contact tracing and the way that that is working. What I would say to him is, what we have in this country is a blended system which brings the scale of a national approach blended with the local knowledge provided by local public health teams, and he's seen in his own city of Leicester how effective that can be, where both parts of that are absolutely vital. And he finished, I think, by talking reasonably about the need for economic support and for support for people who are affected by this. As I set out in the statement, the support scheme, the job support scheme, coupled with universal credit for those eligible for that, will ensure people receive at least 80% of their wages. And on his broader point about the big picture in terms of economic support, I would remind him that this government and the Chancellor have provided an unprecedented package of economic support over recent months to businesses and to individuals. This government is very clear in its commitment to protect the health of this nation and the economic health of this nation.
Nick Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for making this statement. I've had many productive meetings with him and his colleagues within the Department of Health and Social Care during this pandemic, and I know how hard decisions like these are to make. While I understand the necessity for South Yorkshire to go into Tier 3 to reduce the infection rate, businesses and employees are worried about the future. So can he confirm to the people of Doncaster that if they play their part, they will be able to move down to Tier 2 independent of Sheffield City Region?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and he is a consistently strong voice for his constituents in this House and in conversations with ministers. I am clear, as is the government, that no area should remain in a tier longer than is absolutely necessary to address the infection rate and to protect the health of those local people. So the reassurance that his area will stay in that tier no longer than is necessary to address the current rises in hospitalisation and infection rates.
Heading up to Scotland with SN spokesperson Martin Day. Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Minister for advance sight of his statement, and I would agree with him when he says we must keep working hard together to keep this virus under control. Although I can't help but notice that regional leaders in England have been expressing frustrations with Downing Street, which are very similar to Scotland's. Why is there an insistence on announcing measures to Westminster journalists before speaking to devolved and regional governments? And does he not see that changing this approach could greatly improve working relationships? Now, with tens of millions of pounds of financial support being announced this week, will he speak with his colleague, the Chancellor, and confirm that this money will be fully Barnettised, ensuring the devolved governments are being fully funded to take their own COVID mitigation measures?
What's to do with Yorkshire?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. I would say, actually, that in my experience, albeit as a junior minister, I have enjoyed a positive and constructive working relationship over this with the devolved administrations and ministers in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And actually, in my experience, I pay tribute to that relationship and the work that those leaders in the devolved administrations have done. On his final 2 points, in respect of his comments about briefings, all I would say is I am here at the dispatch box announcing this to the House, and that is how I do business. And on his final point, the Chancellor will, I know, have heard exactly what he said about Barnet consequentials.
Miriam Cates.
Here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. None of us in South Yorkshire wanted to be in this position, and I think, as honourable friends have already said, this is going to hit families and businesses and communities hard at a time when we're already weary of months of not seeing family and friends. But it is important we take swift action to protect the NHS, to prevent local NHS services becoming overwhelmed. So I really do want to pay tribute to our Mayor Dan Jarvis, to local leaders, to Number 10, to the Department of Health, who've taken a really calm, constructive and collaborative approach over the past few days, which I think shows that we don't all hate each other in Yorkshire, despite common perception. But I'm also pleased that the restrictions are not open-ended and there is this 28-day review. And I appreciate that the Minister can't give exact metrics about what's going to be used to determine whether or not we come out of this. But I think it's very important for my constituents in Penistone and Stocksbridge that we do know what we're aiming for. So can he guarantee that he will have regular ongoing discussions with the local leaders and local people about whether we're heading in the right direction, to make sure that people do know that we're on the right track?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I would actually, and I should have done this in responding to the Shadow Secretary of State actually, I would also pay tribute to the Mayor, member of this House, for his approach and for the constructive approach that we've seen on all sides in this, so I'd like to put that on the record. The Honourable Lady talks about local engagement and, in a sense, what hope of reviews. Well, the 28-day period, Mr. Speaker, is the sunset point at which these fall unless renewed or altered. There are actually reviews within 14 days. The Secretary of State continues to monitor data and so will be reviewing progress at more frequent intervals. And I can happily give her the assurance she seeks that throughout this process there will be open lines of communication, not only with her and other colleagues, but also with local leaders in the region.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And whilst I'm horrified that we're at this position, I completely understand the need for the introduction of these measures, and I hope that everyone in South Yorkshire will follow them constructively. However, for these to work, we do need a level of support across the country to ensure that these local measures work. And whilst I'm very pleased that we have had constructive conversations throughout this period, I am still concerned that too many people will be left behind in this. I've already heard from one employer about their employees falling through the cracks of the support scheme. They are unable to access funding for childcare on the basis of this as well. And the fact that the lowest paid also use universal credit as an in-work benefit, would the Minister agree and accept and make representations to the Treasury that perhaps 80% of an income topped up by universal credit is not enough in these scenarios?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, both for the tone of her initial remarks, where she is clearly putting the health interests of her constituents first, and also for the tone of her perfectly reasonable question. As I set out in my statement, the job support scheme, coupled with universal credit, does guarantee or will give those on low incomes at least 80% of their normal income. But if it's a specific sector or a specific case she wants to raise with me, I'd be delighted for her to write to me, and I will look into anything specific she wants to raise with me in that.
Alexander Stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. None of us in South Yorkshire wants to be in these higher tiers, but we completely understand the need to save lives and protect the NHS, and that is the overarching thing we need to take away and need to encourage all our populations to do. However, this increased tier system will have an increased impact on people's mental health. I have already been contacted by constituents today who are seriously worried about their mental health, especially when they don't have anyone to form a support bubble with. What assurances can the Minister give to me and the people across Rother Valley that mental health is a key and important part of the system and will be looked after and helped?
Minister?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right on this. I've known him for many years, and I know this is an issue he has long taken an interest in and long campaigned upon. What I can reassure him is that, as he knows, additional investment has gone in to the NHS at all levels. That will include mental health, but he's absolutely right. Lockdown and the impacts of these restrictions on people's mental health should never be underestimated. So it's absolutely right that there is that support and advice available to people. I know that his local NHS is working very hard to ensure that package is in place. If he wishes to talk to me subsequently, I'm very happy to do that.
Blomfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, we have to take the measures that are necessary to combat the virus, and we have, across South Yorkshire, tried to work together on them. But the Minister knows that this deal doesn't meet all the concerns of local leaders, nor does it provide the support that businesses need. The ban on household mixing is clearly necessary, but it makes many cafes, restaurants and pubs with food unviable. It impacts on the music, events and creative sectors. But because they're not being required to close, they won't get the support that they need. They are simply being hung out to dry. So will the government think again and provide the support that these businesses need to save thousands of jobs across South Yorkshire?
Again, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. He is always diligent and measured in representing his constituents and his businesses in this House. The deal that has been reached here, I believe, is both fair and proportionate and reflective of that fairness across other areas, again, which are in Tier 3. And of course, that should be taken in the context of being coupled with the broader national programme. I wouldn't characterise the approach being taken towards hospitality in the way that he did. I would pay tribute actually to our hospitality industry in this country, which I think is what he was seeking to do, which I think is what he was seeking to do. And as I say, the support package is there to support businesses across all sectors in this country.
Dr. Andrew Merson.
Test and trace activity is rightly focused on areas of the country where there is relatively high transmission of the virus. To what extent in the protocols his department is drawing up at the moment for vaccination, will he prioritise Tier 3 areas over Tier 1?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for that point. The protocols for the distribution of any vaccine when it becomes available are currently being worked on intensively. He makes a good point, which I'm sure will have been heard by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State.
Let's head up to Barnsley to visit the Mayor, no less. Dan Jarvis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As Mayor, I think that this is the right course of action for South Yorkshire. The financial support will provide some help for our people and our economy, but we all understand that it will also mean sacrifice. Families will be separated, workers will suffer, and businesses face uncertainty. So I need the Minister and the government to repay that sacrifice by working closely with us, with our local authorities and with our NHS. Together, we need to do everything we can to get a grip of this disease so that our region can move out of these restrictions as soon as possible.
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I reiterate the tribute I paid to the honourable gentleman for his approach throughout this. It is abundantly clear that he, like all of his colleagues, have the best interests of his region at heart and have worked constructively throughout this process to get the right health and economic outcome for his area. I can give him absolutely that commitment. Of course, I and my colleagues look forward to continued close working and cooperation with him as we move forward to beat this disease in his area.
Steve Bryan.
Thank you, sir. The three-tiered local approach has to be right, and I pay tribute, as the Minister just did, to the cool heads of some local leaders for working with ministers so sensibly. But surely people in South Yorkshire and elsewhere need to know where they're at and be confident the goalposts won't move. So can the Minister please comment on stories this morning that plans are being worked up by the CMO for local, not national, local 3-week circuit break lockdowns in Tier 2 and Tier 3 areas?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I can reassure him that that is not something I have been involved in or been cited on.
Neera Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Public trust in the midst of a public health emergency is absolutely critical. People need to know what they are working towards when they are making these immense sacrifices. So could I press the Minister once again on the criteria that he has agreed with the Mayor of Sheffield City Region for South Yorkshire going into Tier 3, the criteria to come out, and will those same criteria be applied to other Tier 2 areas such as London, York, Essex and parts of the Midlands, or will they all be subject to a series of negotiations at a local level behind closed doors? The public need and want to know.
I'm grateful to the honourable lady, her party's spokesperson, I should say, on this issue. I entirely understand where she is coming from on this and the importance of trust and transparency. I think I set out in the statement why the move had been made to increase the tier level in terms of the infection rates, the hospitalisation rates, and why that was a development that needed to be arrested by these measures. And I said that in response to the Shadow Secretary of State, the considerations that would play a part in determining at those review periods when an area could start to move back down those tiers, those things being, as I alluded to, infection rates, the impact on the NHS and hospital capacity in the area, and other local factors. And I think it's reasonable that we set out that broad approach, but also recognise there will be in some areas very specific local considerations that are driving growth of the disease and the infection rates that may need to be taken into consideration as well.
Sir Edward Lee.
Now, if you live in Gainsborough and you want to take a test, you could go to the Lincolnshire Showground, but equally you might get a Doncaster Airport if your work takes you up there and it's not much further. Now, there's a mystery about infection rates in West Lindsey because they're higher than all the surrounding areas, despite the fact that we have no university, we're a rural area, no large hospital. And I suspect the figures are being corrupted because the large local testing site is at the Lincolnshire Showground. And probably cases are coming in from outside and they're figuring in West Lindsey figures. Now, all this is important, not just for South Yorkshire, but for everywhere else, because if these figures are wrong, how can we rely on them? How can we lock down areas, put business out of business, if the figures simply don't add up?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. I'm not aware of any systemic issue that is seeing false data entered, but if he's happy to give me more information, I'm happy to look into it for him. But I would also say there can be other factors, Mr. Speaker, beyond universities, beyond a young population, beyond a range of things in a particular area that drive a particular spike. But I'm happy to look at the information he's got.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister and completely understand the reasons for this statement. Government action for Yorkshire is very similar to the action we've taken in Northern Ireland in relation to the circuit breaker. Simon Hamilton, Chair of Belfast Chamber of Trade, has stated in tandem with 23 other outlets that few and fewer will not survive each lockdown and more jobs will be lost, potentially 100,000, as estimated accurately by the Department of Economy. With the prospect of longer dole queues and re-employment prospects poor, what discussions have taken place and what assistance can the Minister give the devolved administration in Northern Ireland?
Just wait a minute. It is about Yorkshire. I thought you'd have had a little bit of something into Yorkshire. See what you can pick out of Yorkshire in that, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to reassure my honourable friend, the honourable member, that the same collegiate approach we have adopted to working with South Yorkshire characterises our approach across all of the devolved administration and devolved nations as well. And what I could say to the honourable gentleman, we had missed him while he was away self-isolating for a period, so it's good to have him back. He touches on the economic impact. He's absolutely right to highlight that there is a clear support package in place, and I continue to work closely with Robin Swan and others in Northern Ireland on these matters.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, local politicians in Lancashire were able to put their politics aside and work constructively to agree a sensible way forward. I'm delighted that politicians in South Yorkshire have now been able to replicate that same constructive cross-party approach. Will my honourable friend commend those local politicians, including the honourable member for Barnsley, for the way in which those negotiations have been conducted, which of course have been in stark contrast to the behaviour of some other elected mayors?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I would join with my honourable friend in paying tribute to all local leaders and indeed to all members of this House who've been engaged in this process. And more broadly, it is clear, Mr. Speaker, when we all work together, we can achieve more to tackle this disease.
Heading up to Liverpool with Bill Esterson. Bill Esterson.
On Monday, I asked the Health Secretary about contact tracing. He answered by talking about testing. So perhaps this minister will answer a question about contact tracing. Will the government now give the Serco data to local public health teams? And will the government give the financial resources that those local teams need? That equates to roughly £300 million to the Liverpool City region, similar sums to Lancashire and to South Yorkshire, and about £500 million for Greater Manchester when compared to the 12 billion from Serco?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. The data he refers to is, of course, government data, NHS data. He talks about contact tracing. As I said in response to his honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, the approach we adopt on both testing, but particularly on contact tracing, quite rightly, blends the scalability of a national approach with the local knowledge of working very closely hand in hand with local public health teams. A very good example of how that can work well is in my own local city, the honourable gentleman's local city, the Shadow Secretary of State of Leicester.
A bit more.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These really are tough choices, as nobody wants to see their lives restricted or their freedoms curtailed. All of my constituents of Keighley and Ilkley have had local restrictions since the end of July, and for now, at least, we are in Tier 2. Whilst many are adhering incredibly diligently to these restrictions, it is clear that a disenfranchisement is kicking in, with some not adhering. How can we better address this so that we give ourselves the best chance of staying in Tier 2, not going up to Tier 3 like our neighbouring friends of South Yorkshire?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's very important that everyone continues to adhere to the rules put in place for the tier in which their area sits. Those rules are in place to protect public health and bring the infection rate down. But I would finally comment on that, of course, it's important, and I think it was the Liberal Democrats spokesperson who mentioned this, in terms of trust and building trust and consent. It's very important that we work closely with local leaders and with local members of Parliament, and I come to this House, as I have done today, to obtain that consent and give that transparency so people are more likely to comply.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I note the agreement reached in South Yorkshire and fear that York is rapidly heading in the same direction with the sharp increase in infection. Does the Minister recognise that each local authority does have different economies, different complexities and different vulnerabilities? And therefore it's really important to start dialogue early with local political leaders as well as ourselves in order to get the right deal, to prevent an escalation in tiers, but also to ensure that we get on top of the track and trace system to make sure that's locally done and effective.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable lady, and she made the case, actually, I think very well, for the approach that the government is adopting, which is of local tiering rather than a blanket national approach, because different areas of the country are different and have different circumstances. She's absolutely right. But to her substantive point, which was about early engagement and continued engagement, I am very happy to say that I'm very happy to work with her, and we can start that off if she wants. We can have a conversation starting with the data and so on. I'm very happy to ensure that those channels of communication are open.
Mark Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Enforcement is important in South Yorkshire as it is elsewhere, and I'm pleased that on today's order paper there's a statutory instrument putting the requirement to self-isolate in law. But the Minister will be aware that I have grave concerns about the powers to use reasonable force that have been given to state officials other than police officers who are simply not trained to use those powers safely. And as a former Home Office Minister, I think this risks the safety and lives of individuals. Can I ask the Minister to give me an assurance from the dispatch box that at the earliest opportunity these powers will be limited only to police officers? If he can't give me that assurance, I regret to say I will be unable to support the measures on today's order paper.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for his question. I'm conscious of the context in which he speaks. As a former junior minister handling prisons at the Ministry of Justice, I'm conscious of the issues that he is alluding to in that context as well, and the importance of proper training and restraint and similar. The powers, we do appreciate concerns about the reasonable force allowances and the regulations. The powers to authorise persons other than the police and PCSOs to use reasonable force have not been used, and there are no intentions to use them. But he does make his point well, as always, and we are urgently reviewing these powers given the concerns that he and others have raised around proportionality of enforcement.
Heading up to Greater Manchester with Barbara Keeley. Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, Professor Edmonds told the Health and Science Committees that he would not follow the strategy of imposing Tier 3 lockdowns on a succession of local areas. He said it would keep the R number around 1, meaning that the high rate of incidence we already have in those areas, with hospitals under strain, would just continue. Instead, a short circuit breaker having tier 3 restrictions everywhere now is what we were told would bring case rates down. If this is the advice being given to the government, why are they pursuing damaging restrictions on areas like South Yorkshire and Greater Manchester with inadequate financial support and which are unlikely to bring cases down?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable lady, and she will, I hope, forgive me, I didn't see the evidence of the Select Committee as I was preparing to come to this House today. However, as she will be aware, the Sage paper that was published recently in referring to so-called local circuit breaker lockdowns did not say it was a one-off and this would solve the problem. We are confident that we are taking a proportionate and effective approach on a regional and local basis that will, assuming compliance is there, continue to drive down infection rates and be effective in doing that, coupled with an effective economic and financial support package agreed with local leaders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My thoughts are with the people of South Yorkshire and businesses in South Yorkshire. My primary responsibility is to those people in North Yorkshire. Would my honourable friend help to scotch any rumours that are circulating that North Yorkshire is about to go into Tier 2 and actually its rate of infection is well below the national average? But also, if there is any need to put us in a higher tier, would you look to do that on a district-wide level, which varies significantly across North Yorkshire, rather than purely at a county-wide level?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question. If I recall correctly, I believe that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, was able to offer him that reassurance relatively recently in this House in respect of the approach that he was looking to take in that context, and that still stands.
Heading up to Manchester with Andrew Gwynn. Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. The Minister has no doubt given briefings to South Yorkshire colleagues, as indeed he did with Greater Manchester MPs earlier this week, and I sincerely thank him for that engagement. But it's being widely reported that the Communities Secretary is meeting with Greater Manchester's MPs about the next steps for our city region. Sadly, it seems that none of the 18 Labour MPs have received an invite. Is this an accidental oversight, or further evidence of increasing ambivalence towards our city region?
Minister.
Well, I can reassure the honourable gentleman there is no ambivalence towards his city region. There is a deep respect and affection across this House for that region and the people who live there. I'm grateful to him for his kind words about the briefing I led with colleagues across all parties relatively recently on this. I am happy to look into the specific question he raises about being briefed by the local government secretary.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I wish to pay tribute to the Mayor of South Yorkshire, the member for Barnsley Central, for working with the government constructively and showing proper northern leadership in the interests of public health. Can the Minister confirm that when other areas face changes in local restrictions, he and his department will continue to work with local leaders and members of Parliament? And can he also confirm that there are no plans to move the Tees Valley and specifically Redcar and Cleveland, where we've seen our cases drop recently, into Tier 3?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. He's absolutely right to talk about the importance of local leadership and local engagement. Local people, local leaders and local members of Parliament know their area best. So it is absolutely right that we continue to engage very closely with all of them, and I join him in paying tribute to the work that's been done in that respect recently. In respect of his final point, I'm not aware of any such proposition.
Heading up to Scotland with Alison Thewlis. Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People in South Yorkshire, as well as my constituency of Glasgow Central, struggle to make ends meet on the UK government's Pretend 8 living wage, which falls far below the level of the real living wage. So can you tell me how he expects people to live, pay their bills and their rent on only 2/3 of that poverty pay?
Well, as the honourable lady will have heard me say, the combined support schemes will see people, particularly where they get the UC top-up, getting at least 80% of their wages in that context. And I'm afraid I would refute her point about the living wage in this country. I believe that is a significant achievement by this government and the previous Chancellor, George Osborne. It is a huge step forward, and rather than belittling it, I think we should be recognising the impact it has had.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. South Yorkshire is where many, perhaps most of the visitors to Cleethorpes come from. And they're very welcome and, of course, vitally important to the local hospitality sector. However, there are concerns amongst local people because many of them occupy caravans and chalets for weeks and months at a time. And again, that is very welcome. But what concerns local people is that they perhaps may come and go during this period to and from a Tier 3 area. What support can the government offer to the local authorities to monitor this?
Minister. Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. He highlights an important point, and we've been clear that those people in Tier 3 areas should not undertake that travel in and out unnecessarily, and that they should abide by the rules of the area in which they live rather than travelling to another area and applying the rules of that area. The rules apply on the basis of the area in which you live.
Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the big concerns about these local lockdowns in South Yorkshire and elsewhere is if there isn't enough money to support businesses to survive, there will be a longer-term impact on the economy and on individual livelihoods if that's not got right. But specifically for the Health Minister, well, that has a big impact on public health. One of the biggest concerns is the loneliness of people living in single households and the impact on their mental health. So another area of spending, and I hope that the Minister can answer this very directly, is how is the Minister looking ahead to make sure that there isn't a long-term on-cost to the health service of this misery for people who are left alone and unable now to mix in households in South Yorkshire and other areas with hard lockdowns?
Well, the Honourable Lady makes a very important point around loneliness and mental health impact of this. She'll be aware that the support bubbles still exist, but she goes, I think, to a broader point, which is that mental health support and the long-term mental health support. As I referred to in my answer to my honourable friend, I think the member for Rother Valley, we have invested heavily in the NHS. That will include funding for mental health support services and mental health services. But she's absolutely right. It's not just about funding it during this pandemic. It's about being aware of the long-term needs and impacts. And I'm happy to give her the commitment. We will look at exactly that very, very carefully in the months and years ahead.
Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These tough measures will have a huge impact on the lives of local people. Can my honourable friend assure me that they will do everything they can to provide an extensive package of support to local people, businesses and councils, and that his department will continue to do everything they can to avoid the need for such a lockdown in Stockley South?
Minister.
I can give my honourable friend exactly that assurance, sir.
We now head to Tim Farrell.
Mr. Speaker, the hospitality and tourism industry in Cumbria, comfortably our biggest employer, was very much looking forward to the half-term next week as a chance to put back some of the enormous damage that they have received as a result of this virus and to pick up their business. Of course, they're seeing cancellation after cancellation after cancellation because of their neighbouring economies in Lancashire, Greater Manchester, Merseyside, and now, of course, other parts of the north of England as well being put into Tier 3 and therefore people not being able to travel. Rather than quibbling over 5 million, of course, people in Cumbria are getting nothing, no compensation for their business collapsing at the moment. Will he commit to making sure there is support for the hospitality and tourism industry in Tier 1 places like Cumbria when our market has dried up because our neighbours are in Tier 3?
Can I just say to members, it is about Yorkshire. If we could mention Yorkshire, it does help the case. Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and I'm sure that the point he raises will be pertinent to areas perhaps in Tier 1 nearby to South Yorkshire as well. He makes his point typically well, and I'm sure that, and I recognise the impact on the hospitality industry and other businesses, not just in the directly affected area, but more broadly. As I say, he makes his point well, and I'm sure that the Chancellor will have heard what he says.
Robert Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, none of us want to see the restrictions like those that have been announced in Yorkshire today, but we all recognise the need to prevent the NHS from getting overwhelmed. But I am increasingly concerned about the long-term health impact that this pandemic is having on things like mental health and long-term serious health conditions. A good example of this would be the recent commissioning decision by NHS England to withdraw the breast cancer screening units from places like New Mills, Buxton and Chapel on the Frith, citing COVID as the reason for the withdrawal. Will the Minister agree to meet with me so that we can discuss how we can reinstate the breast cancer screening units to the High Peak?
Minister.
I or a fellow minister from the department will be very happy to meet him.
Peter Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Local and regional authority leaders from South Yorkshire right the way through to across the country, Mr. Speaker, will have seen that the Health Secretary and the Prime Minister have repeatedly said in the last 24 hours that they cannot exceed any of the items offered to Merseyside in their negotiations elsewhere. So will the Minister at least be honest and say this isn't a negotiation, this is a take it or leave it deal that other authorities can take? So if you are leading an authority, you've got to ask the question, what's the point of negotiating?
Minister. Well, the honourable gentleman knows I have huge respect for him, indeed a huge fondness for him, but I'm afraid I can't agree with what he has just said there. We have been working very closely in a collegiate way with local authorities, but it's absolutely right that alongside that negotiation, that discussion on the package and the support that they need, that we recognise we have to be fair and proportionate again across other regions which are in the same tier. So we have to ensure that the approach we are adopting, which we are, is both fair and proportionate.
Final question, Lee Rowley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. North East Derbyshire sits on the outskirts of South Yorkshire, and many towns and villages like Dronfield, Eckington, Killamarsh and Ridgeway all look towards Sheffield for work and education. For the benefit of those residents, will the Minister confirm there has been no change to the tiering level in North East Derbyshire, that the rules in North East Derbyshire remain the same unless those residents are travelling to Sheffield, and that North East Derbyshire will continue to be dealt with on an independent basis whilst working closely with Sheffield when we're reviewing our tiering status in the future?
Minister.
Well, as my honourable friend knows, I know Dronfield, having spent a very happy day there with him in the course of his successful election campaign. I can reassure him that the situation as I stand here remains exactly as he set out.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order.
Order! Order! Presentation of Bill, Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Financial Services Bill.
Second reading, what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. We now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Mr. Andrew Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make vehicle registration offences under the Vehicle Excise and Registration Act 1994 attract driving record penalty points and for connected purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill I present today aims to save lives and to relieve the stress on residents living near roads by improving the ability of the police to identify and therefore prosecute antisocial or reckless road users. I should like to be very clear that this bill is not in any way about targeting motorcyclists or indeed motorists in general. There are over 1.25 million motorcyclists in the UK. It's a great sport and an industry, and I'm proud that Destination Triumph has a fantastic dealership for this British-owned brand in Washington, in my constituency of Arundel and South Downs. The vast majority use the roads responsibly, and West Sussex welcomes careful riders and drivers alike. But I arrived at the subject of this bill as a result of the misery inflicted upon my constituents every summer, but which reached a new intensity during lockdown. Misery that means on a day when the roads are dry, the residents of small towns and villages are woken by the sound of motorcycles, and there is no respite until sunset. In places around Wisborough Green, Petworth, Bury Hill, Codwaltham and Tillington, my constituents have to keep their windows closed, however warm the day. Pedestrians feel intimidated, and this issue causes a great deal of mental stress. And it's not just about noise. My constituents travel on statistically the most dangerous roads in the whole of Sussex. In fact, the Chichester Observer reported last month that the Road Safety Federation identified the A285 between Petworth and Chichester as one of the worst in the whole UK, with 29 serious and fatal crashes between 2013 and 2018. Nearly 2/3 of these involve motorcyclists. Similarly dangerous roads include the A272 from Tillington to Cowfold, the A283 between Fittleworth and Stenning, and the A29 from Bury Hill to Adversane. These all carry a particularly dangerous mix of vehicle types even before the addition of a speeding motorcycle or sports car. Even the shortest journey is likely to encounter tractors and combines, a peloton of bicycles, or the local bus service. Things will improve when the long-awaited A27 Arundel bypass is built and takes heavy goods vehicles away from the most dangerous A roads that I've mentioned. But this upgrade was only announced by my friend the Secretary of State for Transport last week and will therefore take many years to arrive. And the issue is not confined to Arundel and South Downs. Members of this House who are supporting today's bill have told me of their concerns about the same issue on the A32 and A272 in the Meon Valley, or the A27 at Sherfield English in Hampshire, and in the Kings North area of Ashford in Kent. Nationally, 5 people are killed and a further 68 receive life-changing injuries every day on our roads. That's one terrible family tragedy every 20 minutes. It falls to the police to do their best to address these twin impacts of antisocial noise and road safety, and I'm grateful for all the efforts of my local police commissioner Katie Bourne and Chief Constable Joe Shiner. This summer has seen a real effort by Sussex Police under Operation Downsway, and I've seen this firsthand when out on patrol with Chief Inspector John Carter and Police Constable Van der Weeb. But despite an increase in police numbers, 380 new officers this year in Sussex and more than 4,000 nationwide, the police simply cannot be everywhere all of the time. Cameras play a vital role in extending their eyes, and that's where today's bill will help. It does this by closing a loophole in the law as it stands today. Currently, While speeding offences are endorsable, that is, they result in points upon the offender's driving licence, the offence of displaying a non-compliant or even displaying no number plate at all carries only a fine. This enables antisocial drivers on our roads, especially in rural areas, to defy both speed and number plate recognition cameras with relative impunity. This is particularly true for owners of high-performance bikes, costing tens of thousands of pounds, where a £100 fine for infringing the law on public roads is far less than the cost of admission to a private and regulated track day. Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst I'm sure that honourable and right honourable members have no first-hand familiarity of the matter, when it comes to driving, points definitely don't make prizes. More points mean substantially higher insurance premiums, and multiple offences quickly make loss of a licence a real consideration. Unlike a fine, penalty points are a real sanction and are more likely to change behaviour. Indeed, I believe that the Home Office Surveillance Camera Commissioners Working Group has made a similar plea for more robust penalties in this area. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me conclude by asking the Government and honourable members from across this House to join me in supporting this bill today. No novelty or innovation is required. It marries an existing offence with an existing sanction that is a tried and tested part of the motoring statute book. It's a measure that has support from the police and residents alike. It is clear and simple and does exactly what it says on the tin. I'm therefore pleased to commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Andrew Mitchell, Bob Blackman, Caroline Noakes, Damien Green, Damien Hines, Flick Drummond, Henry Smith, James Sunderland, Mike Penning, Sir Peter Bottomley, Tim Lawton and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Andrew Griffith.
Vehicle Registration Offences Penalty Points Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 27th of November.
Friday the 27th of November. Thank you. We now come to the first Opposition Day motion on fair economic support for areas facing additional COVID-19 restrictions. I should inform the House that Mr. Speaker has selected the manuscript amendment in the name of the Prime Minister. He has done this because the motion was only tabled shortly before the moment of interruption yesterday, and because one of his predecessors selected a manuscript amendment to an Opposition Day motion in comparable circumstances on Monday the 3rd of December 2001, thus creating a precedent. I call Angela Rayner to move the motion. Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move the motion in my name and in the name of other honourable friends and members. I want to start by placing on record my thanks to the staff at Stepping Hill Hospital in Stockport who cared for my aunt recently who died of coronavirus last week. So I speak today not just as a member of this House nor as a Mancunian, but as someone who, like many others across our city and our country, who in the last few weeks have lost loved ones to this terrible virus. That more than anything is why I come here not wanting the government to fail, but to succeed. Because lives literally depend on it. And we know that a public health response will only save lives if it is supported by a fair economic settlement. The British people want to do the right thing, and they will do the right thing, but we need to support them to do so. That is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was so appalled but by what I witnessed yesterday. I was sat with fellow Greater Manchester MPs on a Zoom call with the Health Secretary, who handed down us the scrapes from the Prime Minister, while our elected Mayor found out from Twitter. They then tried to blame it all on him for not doing what he was ordered to do from Whitehall. I've heard of power without accountability, but apparently their idea of devolution is accountability without the power. We were offered £8 per head. Or to put it another way, 30 seconds of work for a consultant working on the collapse test and trace system. Let me say this. £8 per person is an insult. And now they are attempting to play us off against each other across GM. Well, let me tell the Prime Minister, our Mayor stood up for Greater Manchester, but he spoke for Great Britain. Indeed, his call for Parliament to have a say and a vote on these measures is one that so many members opposite have made. I'll happily give.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On that point about votes in Parliament, many of us called for votes on national restrictions in this place a couple of weeks ago, but unfortunately, near enough all of the members opposite didn't bother to turn up for those votes, including a rule of 6. So if they get their way today and have votes on localised restrictions, will they even turn up?
Well, I see the honourable members. He does the right thing and supports people with an economic package so that people can do the right things and we can save people's lives across Greater Manchester and the whole of this country. So I hope the honourable member supports us in the lobby tonight and does the right thing. The government have not given us the chance to have our say, Madam Deputy Speaker. So today we are giving the House the chance to do so. Our motion calls for the government to bring forward fair national criteria for financial support in areas facing additional restrictions and provides for members to have a vote on that criteria. Yeah.
I congratulate my honourable friend for making some excellent points in her speech. Given that the current government strategy to deal with the pandemic is not working, does my honourable friend agree that rather than using divisive tactics and treating regions of our nation with utter contempt, the Prime Minister needs to adopt a united one-nation approach? And also, does she agree with me that if we want to impose stricter measures, then we need to provide support to individuals and businesses? We cannot have lockdown on the cheap.
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. And the thing is, over the last 24 hours, the people of Greater Manchester, regardless of their political persuasions or colours, are absolutely dismayed by the way in which our democratically elected mayor has been treated. And it's not just the treatment of our democratically elected mayor. It's the people of Greater Manchester. It's not some spiteful little game that's going on. It's people's lives, people's loved ones, people's jobs. They've spent years building up our economy in Greater Manchester. And this government, choosing the path that they've chose, has done one thing for Greater Manchester. It's completely brought us together in the face of saying this government and Prime Minister must do the right thing by the whole of our nation and support everywhere, not pick us off one by one.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, Madam Deputy Speaker, for giving way. What advice would she offer my constituents in the Vale of Glamorgan, where the infection rates are exceptionally low, but there's a one-size-fits-all approach has been taken across the whole of Wales, and retailers, hairdressers, personal service providers, beauticians, all of those sorts of businesses have been closed, irrespective of the exceptionally low rate. Does that make sense? And what has she said? What has she got to say to those businesses that have invested all of their time, effort, money, and innovation into creating employment and wealth?
Well, the Honourable Member makes a point about what the Welsh Government is doing, and what the Welsh Government is doing is putting people and business and lives first. They're working with local government, they're working with businesses to bring the R number down, and what we know from what Sage has said is the plan for Greater Manchester as it currently stands will not bring the R rate down. It will lead us into poverty and destitution. And when I speak to the experts, Madam Deputy Speaker, they tell me that poverty and destitution has a link to how deadly this virus is. So in parts of areas like Oldham in my constituency that have faced restrictions since July, where I've not been able to see my own granddaughter because of those restrictions, those rates have gone up. And what we don't want to see is plunge our businesses into destitution. I'm proud of the Welsh Government and their defence of the people and support that they're offering to the people of Wales. I just wish we had a better government here in Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, our motion calls on the Government now to implement its own promise that workers on the Job Support Scheme extension will receive at least 80% of their previous income. Because I remember the promises the Prime Minister made, not just in this crisis, but before it. He offered levelling up for communities like mine. But he's not levelling us up, he's letting us down. Under Thatcher, we were consigned to managed decline. Now it feels like mismanaged decline. And it's not just a conflict, Madam Deputy Speaker, between the North and the South, or from London and the rest. The elected leaders of our nations, cities, regions and countries have been treated with the same contempt from Wales to Wigan.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and I pass on the condolences of the Scottish National Party on the loss of her aunt to her and her family. Now, we're not in a position to field a front bench spokesperson today, and that might have been easier if the government had allowed us virtual participation, but I can confirm we will support the official opposition in the division lobbies this evening, precisely because of the point she's making about the need for support across the UK. Any enhanced package that is provided to Liverpool, Greater Manchester, South Yorkshire must attract consequentials above what has already been guaranteed to Scotland. Scottish businesses are looking at the additional package of support that the UK Government has found for these English regions and expect additional funding to be delivered to Scotland. Does she agree that that should happen both for Scotland and the other devolved administrations?
I thank the Honourable Member for his contribution. I absolutely agree. And I agree that all our nations, all our regions, the whole of Great Britain has to come together, because this virus is a challenge for all of us, and we cannot treat people in different parts of our country and our nations disparately and disgracefully. Madam Deputy Speaker, in Greater Manchester, we were promised a powerhouse, but what we have at the moment is a power grab. Even here in London, just this week, they have threatened to seize control of the tube. We now have a Prime Minister so determined to punish a Labour mayor that he wants to whack a transport tax on his own constituents. Yet they still refuse to take the decisive national action that is needed. Instead, they have tried to play people off against each other, divide and misrule.
And I'm very sorry to hear about her aunt. Will she be straight and honest with the British citizens when she talks about a national lockdown? Isn't it the reality, if you read the Sage paper, they say it might take multiple circuit breakers to keep this virus at low levels? Isn't that the reality? And will she be clear about the impact that would have on jobs and businesses in this country?
You see, the Honourable Member invites me to be clear and honest, and the one thing that probably most people know is I tell it how it is, and I've always have. And I can be clear and honest with the Honourable Member that the Prime Minister plan as it currently stands will not protect the people of Greater Manchester and will plunge us into more poverty. We've seen the evidence that says that, and I can promise the honourable member and honourable members across this House, the Labour Party will always put the people first and the protection and security of the people first. I ask the honourable member to get the Prime Minister to do the same thing instead of playing party politics with people's lives and people's livelihoods. Today, this House can vote for a fair deal for all and to end these political games. No more will the Health Secretary have to tour the country like a pound shop Noel Edmonds announcing deal or no deal. And they can honour their own promises that every worker facing hardship on the job support scheme will get at least 80% of their previous income. Because what is good enough for the office worker in the City of London is good enough for the caterer in the City of Manchester. What was good enough for the whole of the country in March is good enough for the Midlands and the North today. We're trying to hold them to their own promises, Madam Deputy Speaker. Businesses need consistency and that promise honoured. The Prime Minister told the House on the 14th of October, whatever happens, a combination of the job support scheme and the universal credit will mean that nobody gets less than 93% of their current income. Then he said those on low incomes will get at least 80% of their income. Perhaps he can tell that to the waitress in my constituency who earn £9 an hour on a 32-hour week serving in a central Manchester bar that has now closed. The Resolution Foundation has shown that she will end up with less than 70% of that wage under the government's current plan. So the government is telling my constituent to survive on less than the minimum wage for months, because the government can't tell us when an area will leave Tier 3 and how these restrictions will be lifted. Yeah, happy give way.
I'm very grateful to her for giving way and thank her for the case she's making. Is she interested, as I am, that not a single one of the interventions that she's faced from the Conservative side has actually been relevant to the motion that we're debating? They all seem to be dragging us back on to the Labour Party policy, rather than actually standing up for the financial settlement that they're offering to Manchester and that we know will be going to so many other areas. So can she help me in inviting them to actually speak about the 80% that we're trying to ensure is in some of the most impoverished people, some of the most impoverished workers' pockets, rather than trying to change this debate into the one they want to have?
I thank the honourable member for his contribution, and I'll go a little bit further and compliment some of the members opposite who have stood up as part of Greater Manchester, and I will be incredibly disappointed if what I've seen over the last 24-hour results in it becoming a party political fight. Because in Greater Manchester, despite what the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary was trying to suggest, we were united in trying to support our citizens across the conurbation in doing the right thing, bringing the virus rate down and supporting our economy. I hope we can continue to do that. I hope we don't get distracted by messages that are not in regards to this motion. And I absolutely hope the Prime Minister does the right thing, because this is not just about Greater Manchester. This is coming to a town near you. So many areas now, the R number is increasing. So many areas are in Tier 2. So many areas are going to go into Tier 3. So this is a marker to ensure that our economy survives through these problems.
On that very point about coming to a town near you, well, it's coming to cities and towns in the Sheffield City region has been announced today. Can we say that the package of assistance is totally inadequate? It is nothing like the leaders and the mayor asked for. It is exactly the same as being offered to there. It's a standard package. It's not locally negotiated, it's a standard package. As the leader of Rotherham said, they put lots of civil servants into a room with us to tell us what we couldn't have. That's actually what's been happening in the negotiations.
I thank the Honourable Member for his insight, and many of the local leaders who I've heard from have said that it's felt like they've been blackmailed into taking and pressurised into taking a deal. And Greater Manchester and the Mayor of Greater Manchester wasn't just trying to arbitrarily get more than somewhere else. We put a package together based on the needs of our city, based on the needs of our conurbation, based on the needs of our lowest paid and those businesses that needed the support. It wasn't a bargaining chip to get this or that. It was about making sure that there was a floor that meant that people were given the support that, by the way, this government promised. This government promised that support, and we're just asking them to keep to their promise.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree with me that it's grossly unfair that whilst the Prime Minister reportedly is complaining about not being able to live off 150k a year, he's expecting my constituents in Nottingham and all of our constituents in this House to live off 2/3 of the minimum wage unless a proper economic settlement is provided?
Yeah. I thank my honourable friend for her contribution, and you know, people might grunt on the opposite benches, but the honourable member was a care worker like myself before coming into Parliament and knows exactly how people on the minimum wage feel, and I commend her for standing up for her constituents and not leaving them behind like many members opposite seem to be doing now. Even with 2/3 wage support under the Job Support Scheme extension, it's only available, Madam Deputy Speaker, to businesses legally required to close. Someone who works for a firm that is not required to close, but whose business is severely impacted as a result of the restrictions, for example, a brewery supplying pubs which have to close, gets absolutely nothing.
On that point, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend who is making a very excellent contribution, highlighting the points. Would she agree with me that much of the debate is around Tier 3 support, and not to say that Tier 2 actually have no support whatsoever, emphasising the point she makes?
I thank my honourable member for his intervention, and I absolutely agree. And the honourable member opposite who keeps chuntering, you had your chance, mate. Let other people in. Madam Deputy Speaker, for hundreds of years, Mancunians have been told to know our place, but we've never listened. From the People's History Museum, the Mechanics Institute, our science and industry and women's suffrage, we will not be told what our place is, and we will not be bullied into taking it. We are proud of our history and proud of our collective contribution to our great country, and determined to build a great future together. But this is not just about Greater Manchester. This is about all of us. We will not be picked off one by one, offered the crumbs when we helped bake the loaf. We deserve a fair slice, and our people deserve a government willing to protect them, to do, as the Chancellor had promised, whatever it takes. In recent days, it has been Lancashire, Liverpool and Greater Manchester. Next week, and in the weeks ahead, it will be communities in other parts of the country that find themselves in Tier 3. If the government is prepared to willfully inflict so much harm on its own people in the middle of a pandemic in one part of the country, then they will do it to people elsewhere as well. We are staring down the barrel of a bleak winter because the government have lost control of the virus. Infections are rising. Hospital admissions are rising. Deaths, tragically, are rising. The testing system is collapsed. People and business across the country will be anxious that they won't be able to make ends meet and put food on the table. Our motion today will ensure a fair national deal for the country. A vote of this House on it and the government's own promises to workers kept. Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend this motion to the House.
The question is, no, don't heckle when I'm on my feet. The question is, as on the order paper, I call Steve Barclay to move the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I begin by expressing my condolences and condolences of our colleagues on this side of the House to the Honourable Lady for the loss of her aunt. She is right in her opening to talk of the shared desire of the British people that we represent to do the right thing. And it is why all members of this House want to protect the lives of our, not just family members, but our constituents, and balance the actions needed to do so with protecting jobs and businesses. And the best way to make good for the workers referenced in the Right Honourable Lady's motion is to reduce the spread of the virus through targeted action. And that is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister was right to outline a balanced approach, taking the difficult decisions to save lives and keep the R rate down, while doing everything in our power to protect the jobs and livelihoods of the British people. Indeed, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer said just yesterday, when supporting this tiered regional approach, that it would be, and I quote, inappropriate to enforce a national circuit breaker, which would, quote, not be consistent with the epidemiological picture. And in fact, I will note, in fact, the Shadow Health Secretary, to be fair, was right to also talk about the wider damage of a national lockdown to our economy and society. Of course, I'll give way.
I'm grateful to Madam Deputy Speaker, to my right honourable friend, for giving way. The evidence from the Deputy Chief Medical Officer in England is quite stark, and the statements really make people pay attention. Has he seen any contra-evidence from the Welsh Government that suggests a one-size-fits-all, where my constituents in the Vale of Glamorgan have to face lockdown of all businesses, as we did in March, in spite of having exceptionally low levels of infection rates?
Well, I think what was very clear from what the Deputy Chief Medical Officer said was the importance of targeted action, and I think there has been concern in respect of the Welsh Government. But again, I recognise all leaders are balancing these decisions, and these are difficult decisions, and that's why I pay tribute to the leadership in Liverpool, in Lancashire, in South Yorkshire, that have actually worked constructively with the government. Of course, I could wait.
Today is the anniversary of the terrible events at Aberfan, and none of us will ever forget in Wales. Can I say I'm enormously grateful to the Minister for providing the £2.5 million for the moving of the tip in Tylerstown. I hope that's just a down payment on the rest of the money that's going to come. But can I just ask him whether all the other financial awards that have been made to Manchester and Lancashire and other parts in England are going to have the Barnett formula applied to them, so that there is additional money coming to Wales? Because my biggest fear is there are so many businesses and individual tradespeople who simply cannot afford to take a fortnight off to self-isolate unless there's financial support for them.
Well, firstly, the Honourable Gentleman is right to recognise the importance of today and a national tragedy that unites us all. And as I said to him last time, I'm very keen to work with him constructively, as I know he is, in how we take that work forward. In fact, later today I have a call with the Finance Ministers for the Scottish, Welsh, Northern Ireland administration, so I will be able to talk further about that. But he will know, as I think a fellow unionist, one of the advantages as we have gone through the pandemic has been the broad shoulders we've been able to apply as a United Kingdom around the various business support and job support measures. And so what is announced for England is subject to the usual Barnett process, and I'll be discussing that. But we have also tried, if I just finish this point and then I'll come on and then I'll make some progress. But on this point, I think it is important because one of the concerns, I think, of members across the House is where decisions are taken in Wales that have an economic impact. And it is important that these decisions are coordinated through the Joint Biosecurity Centre in order that a consistent scientific approach, because I think that is the key issue that a number of members have concerns about. Of course, I could win.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way. He was a moment ago suggesting that the Mayor of Manchester hadn't been constructive. He praised how constructive the mayors that had come to an agreement with him were. But isn't it the fact that the Mayor of Manchester made a request for £90 million, was willing to be negotiated all the way down to £65 million, which sounds incredibly constructive to me? Wouldn't it be better, in the spirit of trying to bring everyone back together, for him to recognise the Mayor of Manchester doing what he thinks is right, as are other mayors and council leaders in other areas, whether they agree with the position the Prime Minister and the government come up with or not, and say that everyone in this is attempting to be constructive?
Well, Madam Speaker, I was making a very factual point which picked up on the opening remarks of the Right Honourable Lady. The Mayor of Manchester, in his discussions with government, expressly said Manchester should be treated differently to the other